The number of domestic abuse victims murdered by their abuser could be more than double the known figure, experts believe. They claim at least 130 mainly female victims will be killed every year in England and Wales whose deaths are not investigated as homicides or even counted. This shocking swath of hidden homicides disappear under the radar because, despite the known risk of violence, police ultimately dismiss murder as a potential cause. On the anniversary of the murder of Sarah Everard by police officer Wayne Couzens, campaigners are calling for every sudden, unexplained death where domestic abuse is known to be investigated as a potential homicide. For the scene to be secured and a forensic post-mortem considered, incredibly, steps are regularly missed, overlooked or ruled out, according to experts. A forensic post-mortem is also required for these deaths to be counted, as no national record exists. It has been 1 year since Sarah Everard was killed by Met Police officer Wayne Couzens, Image, PA. The National Policing Framework for Reducing Violence Against Women, launched in the wake of Miss Everard's murder, promised to deliver a fundamental shift in the priority of violence against women and asked all police forces to respond with plans by this month. Campaigners want their calls acted on, alongside a count of missing domestic abuse victims, plus suicide victims where domestic abuse is known, because many of these will have been caused by persistent abuse, or chillingly, even staged. Launching new campaign Not Just Another, homicide specialist, Professor Jane Monckton-Smith says, "This is the anniversary of the murder of Sarah Everard and we are saying you have to start counting how many women are dying, and you have to start investigating their deaths properly. These are deaths passed off as sex games gone wrong, drug overdoses. All we are asking is count them and investigate them, because we just don't know." Each year on March 8 Labour MP Jess Phillips reads out the names of victims of known domestic abuse homicides, Image, PA. In an open letter sent to every MP and Community Safety Partnership sent out on Tuesday, Professor Monckton-Smith, backed by more than 300 organizations and bereaved families, urged every force to ensure murders of women do not fall through the cracks. Each year Labour MP Jess Phillips reads out the names of victims of known domestic abuse homicides compiled by the Femicide Census on International Women's Day on March 8. She says, "There are hundreds of women missing from the list I read out each year. I could be reading out double the number of names. I have seen cases where families have undertaken investigation themselves because they knew their daughter, their sister, their mom, was in an abusive relationship, and that just hasn't been considered a factor. It's very, very dangerous. Fundamentally, in cases where abusers do not take their own lives, it leaves dangerous people on the streets. That should be fundamental for the government. Without question, they should be looking at legislative opportunities, and if not legislation, they should be working with police forces to make sure this is not the." Katie Wilding was thought to have died after a drug overdose, but her family suspect it was her violent and abusive partner Mitchell Richardson, 33. Katie's mom, Julie Onger, pictured, says she is devastated her child's life was so inconsequential. The family of 21-year-old home bird, Katie Wilding, 21, believe her lost life is one of these hidden homicides. "I am completely devastated. My child's life was so inconsequential it didn't matter," says her mother Julie Onger, 54. Eroded by PTSD and prolonged grief, this normally unemotional woman is choked with it and pauses as she speaks. Julie has fought to keep it together for too long. She and her family claim hairdresser Katie was murdered by her violently abusive partner Mitchell Richardson, 33, who was found dead alongside her in November. A drug overdose was ruled the cause of death for both, and they must accept any other cause can never be proved. Devon and Cornwall police did not commission a forensic postmortem. This is despite, Julie says, Richardson threatening to kill Katie with drugs. Homicide specialist Professor Monckton-Smith is backed by over 300 organizations and bereaved families in urging every force to ensure murders of women do not fall through the cracks. Image, Western Daily Press. Just weeks before their deaths, after being released on bail for attacking Katie, Richardson called Julie and she claims he made the threat. She says she kept a contemporaneous note and says she relayed it to police. Richardson then kidnapped and assaulted Katie again before officers arrested and then released him on bail for a second time. Julie reveals her horrified scribbled record, which she says reads starkly, "Kill her with drugs, I won't prove it." The note is short as if she couldn't believe what she was writing. The words still shock her today. From her home in Paynton, Devon, she claims, "He laughed and said, 'Oh, she will come back to me, if I can't have her no one else will.' He said, 'Julie, I could kill her with drugs and you'd never prove it.'" Katie's body was found alongside Richardson's at his home, surrounded by illegal drugs and instruments to administer them. Katie had made a heartbreaking video statement about Richardson's abuse to police and had been deemed at high risk by local agencies. Devastating for the family, Katie's inquest was joint with Richardson's. The indignity and anger of sitting with his family hasn't left them. A combination of cocaine and morphine was found in her system and his, and locally the deaths were discussed as a Romeo and Juliet pact or accident. File photo dated March 13, 2021, shows people in the crowd turning on their phone torches in Clapham Common, London, for a vigil for Sarah Everard, Image, PA. The coroner recorded narrative verdicts but acknowledged the circumstances surrounding the deaths would never be known. The family fought for Devon and Cornwall police to pursue their complaints about their handling of the case. When they did, the family's allegation they completed a poor investigation into Katie's death was upheld, among others. Now, Devon and Cornwall police says, police fully investigated the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Katie Wilding and Mitchell Richardson in November 2016 and found that there was no evidence to suggest that this matter was a homicide. They add, "None of the upheld complaints would have had an impact on our findings in this case." This opinion was shared by the coroner within their narrative. Tackling domestic abuse is a priority for Devon and Cornwall police. After 3 years, Tabbay's Community Safety Partnership agreed to launch a domestic homicide review, DHR, to explore circumstances leading to Katie's death. From a multi-agency perspective, the results are hoped for this month. Ms. Phillips said she has seen cases where families have been forced to do their own investigations because of police failings. Image, PA. Why, when she's laid dead next to someone who had made all these threats to kill her, why was it just, "Oh, it's drugs"? Asks Julie. Professor Monckton Smith, a former constable, claims ingrained misogyny is regularly at the root of police mishandling of domestic abuse cases generally in this country. She claims across the board, you can't separate out the instant decisions that are being made at the scene of a sudden death from bias towards the victim. Because she is a woman, it's domestic abuse. Why didn't she leave? She was asking for it. If she hadn't behaved like this. Female officers have this too. Shockingly, she recalls a comment by a female police representative on an unidentified domestic homicide review, DHR, she heard recently. She said, "The police representative said, well, over half of rape victims are liars anyway." That was a female officer. No one called them out on it. Because of the lack of counting of these kinds of deaths, firm figures are non-existent. Professor Monckton Smith's estimate of at least 130 is based on one police force's rare count of 15 sudden, unexplained deaths with domestic abuse markers. Where homicide wasn't investigated, over 5 years, 3 a year, obtained in Foix by Tortoise Media. Extrapolated across England and Wales's 43 police forces, that would be the equivalent of 129 a year, but she believes the true figure will be higher. Research on domestic abuse-related suicides has estimated 1 in 8 of all female suicides and suicide attempts in the UK are due to domestic abuse. Home Secretary Priti Patel has this week told police to give violence against women and girls as much priority as fighting terrorism. She has launched a national communications campaign which says, "Enough to violence against women and girls," including TV adverts and billboards, devise. With an advisory group of over 30 voluntary sector organizations, survivors and academics. And commissioned an independent inquiry, chaired by Dame Ailsh Angiolini QC, to scrutinize the robustness of vetting practices, professional standards and discipline, and workplace behavior within the police. The Home Office says, the government is committed to doing more in driving long-term change to tackle this abhorrent issue, and the police must do better. They say in the coming months they will publish a strategy dedicated to address domestic abuse. The open letter will be sent with Monckton Smith's book, In Control: Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder, which outlines the 8 steps, which typically lead from domestic abuse to murder. Julie claims Katie's experience fits it to a T. The Home Office has promised to publish a strategy dedicated to address domestic abuse. Image: Met Police. Now she simply wants her to count her vivacious baby girl who loved bacon sandwiches, Ed Sheeran, and most of all, her family. Katie had a life, she lived her life, she laughed, she loved, she says. We want Katie's voice to be heard. Grieving families call for reinvestigation into loved ones' deaths. Jane Monckton Smith is currently working with up to 15 families who are pleading for a reinvestigation into their loved one's death because they believe it may have been a murder by a domestic abuser. Legally, most cannot be named because there has been no conviction. In some cases, police will eventually reinvestigate a death, but often it is too late, the evidence has gone. Last year, West Midlands Police apologized to the family of domestic abuse victim Suzanne Van Hagen. The 34-year-old and her abusive partner John Wharton, 37, were both found dead by her 9-year-old daughter at their home in Worcestershire in 2013. Officers said their deaths were due to an accidental overdose of drugs taken during a sex game. The family told police Suzanne was a victim of domestic abuse, only to be told by a female officer, "Your sister had 2 legs and she should have used." A police review in 2017 found the senior investigating officer had failed to make proper inquiries about marks to Ms. Van Hagen's neck when her body was. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority found the marks were an act of violence committed by Wharton. The force apologized for a number of failings in the handling of Suzanne's case, both before and after her death. Advocacy After Fatal Domestic Abuse, AAFDA, CEO Frank Mullins said, "How many other deaths, in domestic circumstances, following violent crime, have been inadequately investigated?"